Have you ever trusted someone so completely that when they betrayed you, your entire world collapsed? Picture this: a billionaire CEO walks into his own restaurant, sits down at a random table, and a waitress he's never met slips him a secret note. What she writes on that crumpled piece of paper will expose corruption worth millions, save lives, and prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust a complete stranger. Stay with me, because this story gets wild. Theodore Blackwood had everything money could buy. At 42, he owned restaurants across 3 continents, lived in a Manhattan penthouse that screamed luxury, and had a bank account that could finance small nations. But here's the thing about success: it can become the most beautiful prison you've ever seen. Every morning, he'd wake up in his designer sheets, sip espresso that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and feel absolutely nothing. Empty. Alone. Like he was watching his own life through soundproof glass. That particular Tuesday morning, Theodore was drowning in spreadsheets when one location caught his eye. Chicago, location 47. The numbers were bleeding red. Revenue down 18%. Customer complaints skyrocketing. Employee turnover at a jaw-dropping 67%. This wasn't just bad business. This was his grandmother's legacy dying a slow, painful death. See, his grandmother Eleanor had worked double shifts at a Queen's diner to put him through college. Her hands were always stained with coffee, her apron perpetually wrinkled. But her heart? That woman had enough love to warm every stranger who walked through her door. She taught him something powerful. Restaurants aren't about food. They're about making people feel like they belong somewhere, like someone actually cares whether they exist. Theodore had built his empire on that principle. But somewhere between boardrooms and profit margins, he'd lost the plot. When was the last time he'd actually walked into one of his restaurants and just listened? Just watched? Just felt what his customers felt? The answer made him uncomfortable. He grabbed his phone, canceled his evening plans, and made a decision that would change absolutely everything. 600 miles away in Chicago's South Side, Zara Williams was fighting her own war. Her apartment on Cottage Grove Avenue wasn't much, just a cramped space with thin walls that broadcast every neighbor's argument. But it overflowed with something Theodore's penthouse lacked entirely: pure, unfiltered love. Her 6-year-old daughter Amelia was a force of nature. Curls bouncing, brown eyes sparkling with intelligence that seemed almost otherworldly for her age, wearing a bright yellow dress Zara had found at a thrift store and altered with her own hands. "Mama, I can't find my purple crayon," Amelia called out, frantically digging through her art supplies like an archaeologist on a deadline. Zara smiled, that warm melody in her voice never faltering despite the exhaustion etched into her bones. At 28, she possessed a beauty that poverty and hardship couldn't touch. Her caramel skin glowed even after double shifts, her dark eyes missed nothing, and when she smiled, really smiled, it could light up the darkest corners of the world. "Check under your math homework, baby girl," Zara replied, already knowing exactly where that crayon would be. Amelia squealed victoriously, holding up the purple crayon like she'd just discovered buried treasure. "Now I can finish my picture of us in our new house." Those words hit Zara like a punch to the chest. Their current apartment was clean because Zara worked herself to the bone keeping it that way, but it was cramped, overlooking a parking lot instead of the garden Amelia dreamed about. Still, it was theirs. Zara had worked 3 jobs to keep this roof over their heads after Amelia's father vanished when their daughter was barely 2 years old. "Tell me about this new house," Zara said, sitting beside her daughter and running gentle fingers through those beautiful curls. Amelia's entire face transformed with joy. "It has a big kitchen where you can cook all your favorite recipes, and a yard where we can plant flowers, and my own room with purple walls and stars on the ceiling." Zara's voice caught. "That sounds absolutely perfect, sweetheart." If only Amelia knew how precarious everything really was. The job at Blackwood Diner barely covered their expenses, especially with the rent increase looming like a thundercloud on the horizon. But Amelia didn't need to carry that burden. Children shouldn't have to worry about money or survival. That was Zara's job. She glanced at the envelope on the counter containing her carefully saved tips from the past month. $347. Not nearly enough for Amelia's upcoming school field trip, nowhere close to the security deposit for a better apartment. But it represented progress, and Zara Williams had built her entire life on small victories, on refusing to give up even when the universe seemed determined to break her. As they walked to the bus stop, Amelia's small hand tucked securely in hers, Zara tried to shake the unease that had been growing like mold in her chest for weeks. Something was deeply wrong at the diner. Money was disappearing from the tip pool like magic. Employees were being threatened for asking questions. And the district manager, Kevin Murphy, watched everything with cold eyes that made her skin crawl in a way she couldn't quite explain. Yesterday, when she'd questioned why her paycheck was short again, Kevin had cornered her in the supply closet. His breath reeked of cigarettes as he whispered close to her ear, making her stomach turn. "Careful, Zara. Single mothers in your situation can't afford to lose their jobs, especially when they have such pretty little daughters." The threat had been crystal clear. She'd lain awake all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what to do. But what choice did she have? She needed this job. Amelia needed stability. And going to the police meant risking everything when Kevin had connections throughout the city, cops who ate at the restaurant regularly and treated him like their best friend. "Mama, you okay?" Amelia's voice broke through the darkness of her thoughts. Zara forced her brightest smile. "Just thinking about how proud I am of you, baby girl." But as the bus approached, carrying them toward another uncertain day, Zara silently promised herself that somehow, someday, she'd find a way to protect her daughter and expose the truth. She just had to be smart about it. She just had to survive long enough to figure out how. Now, think about this for a second. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice? Have you ever had to decide between doing what's right and protecting someone you love? Keep that feeling in mind, because what happens next will test everything you think you know about courage. The autumn wind whipped through downtown Chicago as Theodore Blackwood stepped out of his rented Honda Civic. Talk about a downgrade from his usual Bentley, right? He'd traded his $1,000 suits for worn jeans, scuffed work boots, and a faded Northwestern University sweatshirt. Clothes that would help him blend into the working-class neighborhood surrounding his restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, worth $2.3 billion, pretending to be ordinary just to understand why his own business was falling apart. Blackwood Diner sat on the corner of 53rd and State Street. Red brick exterior, classic neon sign, exactly as he'd envisioned 3 years ago. Through the large windows, he could see customers seated in those retro-style booths he'd personally selected, arguing with the design team to preserve that 1950s aesthetic. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But Theodore had learned the hard way that appearances were the best liars in the world. He pushed open the glass door. A small bell announced his arrival. The interior maintained that nostalgic vibe he'd fought so hard to create: checkered floors, red vinyl booths, chrome stools along a long counter. Photos of Chicago's history lined the walls. A vintage jukebox played Sinatra in the corner. It should have felt like stepping into his grandmother's memory, like coming home to a place that existed only in his heart. Instead, the atmosphere felt tense, almost hostile, like walking into a room right after a brutal argument. "Sit wherever you want," a tired-looking hostess mumbled without even looking up from her phone. Her name tag read Kelly. Blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The restaurant's signature burgundy uniform wrinkled and stained like she'd slept in it. Theodore chose a booth near the window, positioning himself where he could observe the entire dining room like a hawk studying prey. What he saw made his stomach churn with a sick, heavy feeling. Servers moved with obvious reluctance, fake smiles dropping the moment they turned away from customers. Tables sat dirty for long minutes before being cleared. Behind the counter, he caught glimpses of staff members huddled in worried conversations, glancing around like they were planning an escape. This wasn't the warm, welcoming environment he'd dreamed of creating. This was something else entirely. Something wrong. "Coffee." The voice was melodic despite its professional tone. Theodore looked up to find himself face-to-face with the most striking woman he'd seen in years. Late 20s, caramel skin that seemed to glow despite the harsh fluorescent lighting, dark eyes that held intelligence and something else, a weariness that spoke of hard-won wisdom, of battles fought and survived. Her name tag read Zara. She wore the burgundy uniform with a dignity that elevated the simple outfit into something almost elegant. Unlike the other staff, her appearance was immaculate, every detail perfect despite what he suspected were challenging circumstances. "Please," he replied, trying to keep his voice casual, unremarkable. "Black." Something flickered in her eyes. A flash of recognition, so quick he almost missed it, like lightning on the horizon. But she simply nodded and moved away, movements graceful and efficient despite the chaos around her. Theodore watched her work as she moved between tables. Unlike her colleagues, Zara treated every customer with genuine warmth that couldn't be faked. She remembered an elderly man's preference for extra cream, helped a young mother clean up her toddler's spilled juice without complaint, without that martyred sigh people sometimes give, and somehow managed to smile authentically even when dealing with a particularly rude businessman who actually snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. When she returned with his coffee, Theodore was ready with his cover story, his carefully crafted lie. "Thanks," he said, affecting the casual tone of a construction worker on break. "Haven't been here before. Food any good?" "The apple pie is excellent," Zara replied, her voice carefully neutral, professional. "My personal recommendation." She set the white ceramic mug in front of him. And that's when it happened. As she placed the coffee down, she smoothly slid a folded piece of paper underneath the saucer. The movement was so subtle, so perfectly executed that anyone watching would have seen nothing more than a waitress serving coffee. But her eyes met his for just a moment. And in that glance, Theodore saw fear, determination, and something that made his blood run cold: desperation. "I know who you are," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the diner's ambient noise, the clatter of plates and murmur of conversation. "They're going to destroy you." Theodore's hand froze halfway to the coffee cup. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami. She knew. This waitress, this complete stranger, had recognized him despite his careful disguise. Zara straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place like a well-rehearsed performance. "Can I get you anything else to start?" Theodore's throat felt dry as desert sand. "The pie. You mentioned pie. Coming right up." Her smile was perfectly normal, giving absolutely no indication of the bombshell she just dropped like it was nothing. As she walked away, Theodore's mind raced at 100 miles per hour. How had she recognized him? His photos rarely appeared in local media, and when they did, he was always in expensive suits with styled hair, looking every inch the billionaire CEO. Today, he looked like any other middle-aged man grabbing lunch on a Tuesday afternoon. With trembling fingers, he carefully extracted the note from under his coffee cup, keeping it low and out of sight like he was handling evidence at a crime scene. The paper was small, torn from what looked like an order pad. The handwriting was neat, feminine, urgent. "They are stealing from you. Kevin Murphy is the ringleader. Meet me Millennium Park tonight at 8 p.m. near the Crown Fountain. Come alone. Your people are in serious trouble. We're scared." Theodore read the note twice, then a third time. His coffee grew cold as the weight of the words sank in like stones in water. Kevin Murphy. He'd hired Kevin 2 years ago based on glowing recommendations and impressive quarterly reports. The man had seemed professional, efficient, results-oriented. Everything you'd want in a district manager. But if this note was true... Theodore folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet, his mind already racing ahead to implications and solutions, to questions that had no easy answers. But beneath the business analysis, beneath the shock and confusion, something else stirred in his chest. A profound respect for the woman who'd just risked everything to warn him. A complete stranger willing to put her job, her safety, maybe her life on the line for someone she'd never met. Zara returned with a slice of apple pie that looked homemade, the crust golden and flaky, exactly the way his grandmother used to make it. "Our baker made this fresh this morning," she said, setting it down with the same careful precision she'd used for the coffee. Every movement deliberate, controlled. "Thank you," Theodore said. And this time he meant it for more than just the pie. She nodded once, a nearly imperceptible acknowledgement that his message had been received. Then she moved on to the next table, continuing her work as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just turned his world completely upside down. But everything had changed. Everything. Theodore forced himself to eat the pie, which was indeed excellent, while discreetly observing the restaurant with new eyes, seeing things he'd missed before. Now he noticed the small things that spoke volumes, servers glancing nervously toward the back office like they expected someone to emerge and punish them. The way conversations stopped when a tall man in a suit walked through, surveying the dining room like a general inspecting troops. The tension that seemed to permeate the entire space like smoke you couldn't quite see. The man in the suit had to be Kevin Murphy. Mid-40s, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive watch catching the light, an air of authority that felt more like intimidation than leadership. He moved through the restaurant like he owned it, his pale blue eyes missing nothing, cataloging everything. When Kevin's gaze swept past Theodore's table, those eyes lingered for just a moment. Long enough to make Theodore wonder if his disguise was as effective as he'd hoped. Long enough to send a chill down his spine. 20 minutes later, Theodore paid his check and left. But not before catching one last glimpse of Zara. She was clearing a table near the window. And for just a moment, their eyes met again. In that brief connection, he saw the fear she'd been hiding beneath her professional exterior. But also something else, something that made his chest tighten. Hope. Walking back to his rental car, Theodore's mind churned with questions and possibilities, spinning scenarios like a mental kaleidoscope. In the span of 30 minutes, a complete stranger had turned his world upside down. She'd risked her job, possibly her safety, to warn him about corruption in his own company. Who was she? Why had she recognized him? And most importantly, was she telling the truth? As he drove away from the diner, Theodore made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tonight, at 8 o'clock, he would find out exactly what Zara Williams was willing to risk everything to tell him. Behind him, through the restaurant's window, Zara watched the Honda Civic disappear into traffic. Her hands shook slightly as she cleared the last plates from his table. But her resolve was iron-strong, forged in fires he couldn't even imagine. She'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. Whatever happened next, she'd finally chosen courage over fear. For Amelia. For herself. And maybe, just maybe, for the man who might be their only hope for justice. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Because while Theodore's sitting in his car 3 blocks away, trying to process what just happened, trying to decide if he's just met the bravest person he's ever encountered or walked straight into an elaborate trap, Zara's back at the restaurant facing consequences she can't even begin to imagine. Theodore sat in his rental car, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. The note felt like it was burning a hole through his wallet. Each word echoing in his thoughts with increasing intensity, getting louder and louder. Kevin Murphy is stealing from you. Your people are in serious trouble. We're scared. Part of him, the successful businessman who'd built an empire from absolutely nothing, wanted to dismiss this as the ramblings of a disgruntled employee looking for attention or revenge. People made accusations all the time, usually when they weren't performing well themselves, when they needed someone else to blame. Kevin's quarterly reports had been solid. His efficiency ratings high. The numbers didn't lie. But those eyes, Zara's eyes had held something that couldn't be faked, couldn't be manufactured or rehearsed. Genuine terror mixed with desperate hope. The kind of expression that came from living in fear for so long that courage became the only option left. Theodore pulled out his phone and scrolled to Kevin Murphy's contact information. His thumb hovered over the call button. The logical move would be to confront his district manager directly, right? Demand explanations. Get to the bottom of this immediately. Fast, efficient, decisive. Instead, he found himself thinking about the way Zara had whispered those words. They're going to destroy you. Not, he's going to destroy you. They. Multiple people. A conspiracy. If Kevin was truly involved in something criminal, calling him now would be like announcing an investigation before it even began. Evidence could disappear faster than smoke and wind. Witnesses could be silenced or threatened further. The whole operation could vanish overnight. Theodore set the phone down and started the engine. He needed more information before making any moves. He needed to think. Meanwhile, back at Blackwood Diner, Zara's hands trembled as she refilled the coffee pot for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, movements mechanical, automatic. The lunch rush was winding down, but her nervous energy made standing still absolutely impossible. Every time the back office door opened, Her heart jumped into her throat. Every footstep behind her made her shoulders tense like she was waiting for a blow. What had she done? What had she actually done? "You okay, honey?" asked Dorothy, the veteran waitress who'd been working at the diner since before Theodore bought it. At 62, Dorothy had seen everything the restaurant industry could throw at someone. She'd developed a sixth sense for when her colleagues were struggling, when something was deeply wrong. "Fine," Zara replied automatically. But her voice came out an octave too high, shrill with false cheerfulness. Dorothy moved closer, pretending to organize napkin dispensers while keeping her voice low, conspiratorial. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Did that customer give you trouble?" The one in the northwestern sweatshirt. Zara's blood ran cold. Had Dorothy noticed something? Had anyone else seen her pass the note? Were people watching, reporting back to Kevin right now? "No trouble," she managed, her voice tight. "Just tired." But Dorothy's weathered face showed genuine concern, the kind that came from decades of caring about people. "Zara, baby, I've been doing this for 40 years. I know when someone's rattled. If you're having problems with money again, or if someone's bothering you." "Dorothy, everything's fine," Zara interrupted, hating how sharp her voice sounded. How ungrateful. Dorothy had been nothing but kind to her since she'd started working here 18 months ago, teaching her the ropes, covering her shifts when Amelia was sick, never asking questions when Zara showed up with shadows under her eyes. The older woman's expression softened. "All right, but you know where to find me if you need to talk." As Dorothy walked away, Zara felt a stab of guilt sharp enough to make her wince. She'd been lying to everyone lately. To Dorothy. To her neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who watched Amelia after school. Even to her daughter when she asked why Mommy looked so worried all the time. The lies were necessary. Kevin Murphy had made that crystal clear 3 weeks ago when he'd cornered her in the supply closet, his body blocking the only exit. "You seem like a smart girl, Zara," he'd said, his cologne overwhelming in the small space, making her eyes water. Smart enough to know that some things are better left unobserved. Unmentioned. Forgotten. She'd nodded, terrified, as his pale eyes bored into hers like he was reading her soul. "Good," he'd continued, his voice pleasant, conversational. "Because accidents happen in this business. People lose their jobs. Sometimes they lose more than that. And it would be such a shame if something happened to that pretty little daughter of yours." The threat had been delivered in the same pleasant tone Kevin used when discussing menu changes with customers, that same friendly smile plastered across his face. But Zara had seen the steel beneath his smile, had recognized the predator behind the professional mask. And she'd known with absolute certainty that he wasn't bluffing. For 3 weeks, she'd kept her mouth shut. She'd watched Kevin and his cronies, assistant manager Brad Peterson and head cook Tony Romano, systematically steal from the restaurant and intimidate the staff into silence. She'd seen them skim cash from the registers with practiced ease, inflate vendor invoices, and pocket the difference. Mark premium steaks as spoiled in the inventory system, then sell them out the back door to their friends at bargain prices. But today, when she'd recognized Theodore Blackwood sitting in booth 7, looking so ordinary and unremarkable in his casual clothes, something inside her had snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. Maybe it was the irony of seeing the restaurant's actual owner being deceived in his own establishment. Maybe it was the memory of her father, who taught her that silence in the face of injustice was complicity, that doing nothing made you part of the problem. Or maybe it was simply the desperate hope that someone with real power might finally be able to stop the nightmare that her workplace had become, might finally make things right. Whatever the reason, she'd acted on impulse. And now she was terrified. "Zara." The voice behind her was calm, friendly, and absolutely terrifying. Every hair on her body stood at attention. Zara turned to find Kevin Murphy standing 3 feet away, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the October humidity outside. His charcoal suit immaculate, not a thread out of place. He looked like success incarnate. "Kevin," she replied, proud that her voice came out steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "How can I help you? Could you step into my office for a moment?" It wasn't a request, despite the pleasant tone. "There's something I'd like to discuss." Zara nodded and followed him toward the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen where Tony Romano was aggressively chopping vegetables with a cleaver that seemed unnecessarily large. Past the storage area where Brad Peterson was supposedly taking inventory, his eyes following her movements like a cat watching a mouse. Kevin's office was small but well-appointed. Mahogany desk that probably cost more than Zara made in 2 months. Sports memorabilia lined the walls. Signed footballs, framed jerseys, photos of Kevin with various Chicago athletes, all smiling like they were best friends. The overall effect was meant to be impressive, masculine, powerful. But to Zara, it felt like a cage with the door slowly closing. Kevin closed the door and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. He settled into his leather executive chair with the satisfied smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey, who knew escape was impossible. "You've been with us for 18 months now," he began conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. "Excellent attendance. Good customer reviews. No complaints. A model employee." "Thank you," Zara said carefully, every muscle in her body tensed for danger. "Which is why I was surprised to hear from Tony that you seemed agitated during the lunch rush. Distracted. Making mistakes." Zara's heart pounded, so hard she thought he must be able to hear it, must be able to see it hammering against her chest. She hadn't made any mistakes. She was always careful about that, always triple-checking everything. But Tony Romano had been watching her, probably reporting back to Kevin about her behavior, about every twitch and glance. "I'm sorry if I seem distracted," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I have a lot on my mind with my daughter starting a new school program." "Ah yes, Amelia," Kevin said, and the way he said her daughter's name made Zara's skin crawl like insects were walking across her flesh. 6 years old now, isn't she? Such a bright little girl. Beautiful child. I saw her picture on your locker." The fact that he'd been looking at the photos in her locker felt like a violation, like he'd reached inside her and grabbed her heart. Kevin had no business knowing her daughter's name or age. No business thinking about Amelia at all. "She is," Zara replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the rage building in her chest like a fire barely contained. Kevin leaned forward, his pale blue eyes never leaving her face, studying her like a scientist examining a specimen. "I hope she stays safe. Chicago can be such a dangerous city for children. All those busy streets. All those strangers who might not have her best interests at heart." The threat was barely veiled, a thin disguise that fooled no one. But it was unmistakably there, hanging in the air between them like poison gas. Zara felt her resolve wavering. What was she thinking? Trying to take on someone like Kevin Murphy? He had money, connections, power. She was just a single mother trying to survive, to give her daughter a chance at a decent life. But then she thought about the note currently sitting in Theodore Blackwood's wallet. She'd already crossed the line. There was no going back now, no rewinding the clock. "I understand your concern," she said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "I'll make sure Amelia is always careful." Kevin studied her face for a long moment, clearly looking for signs of defiance or deception, searching for cracks in her facade. Finally, he sat back in his chair, apparently satisfied. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." He paused, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "Oh, and Zara, that customer you served today. The one in the Northwestern sweatshirt. Did he say anything unusual? Ask any strange questions?" Zara's blood turned to ice water in her veins. But she forced herself to appear confused, innocent. "Strange questions? No, I don't think so. He just ordered coffee and pie." "Why?" "Just curious," Kevin said, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He seemed to be observing the restaurant quite carefully. "Made me wonder if he might be from the health department. Or perhaps a food critic." "I didn't notice anything unusual," Zara lied smoothly, amazed at how easily the deception rolled off her tongue. "He seemed like a regular customer to me." Kevin nodded slowly, but Zara could see he wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm sure you're right. After all, you're very observant. I'm confident you would have mentioned anything noteworthy." The emphasis on that last word sent chills racing down Zara's spine like ice water. Kevin suspected something. He wasn't sure what, but he knew something was off. That gave her a small advantage. But she knew it wouldn't last long. Not with Kevin Murphy. "Is there anything else?" she asked, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster. "Not at all. Thank you for your time." Zara left the office on unsteady legs, Kevin's threats echoing in her mind like a broken record she couldn't turn off. As she returned to the dining room, she caught Tony Romano's eyes following her movements, his expression cold and calculating. Brad Peterson emerged from the storage room and gave her a smile that made her stomach turn, predatory and knowing. They were watching her now. All of them. Waiting for her to make a mistake, to give them an excuse to follow through on their threats. But it was too late to back down. Too late to pretend she hadn't seen anything, hadn't done anything. In 6 hours, she would either save Theodore Blackwood's business and protect her fellow employees, or she would face consequences too terrible to imagine. As she returned to work, clearing tables and refilling coffee cups with mechanical precision, her body moving on autopilot, Zara made peace with her choice. She'd spent too much of her life being afraid. Afraid of her ex-husband. Afraid of poverty. Afraid of taking risks that might make things worse instead of better. Tonight, for the first time in years, she was going to choose courage over fear. Whatever the cost. Whatever happened next. 5 miles away, Theodore Blackwood sat in his hotel room, staring at Zara's note and wrestling with his own doubts, his own fears. In 3 hours, he would learn whether his faith in a stranger's courage was justified, or whether he was walking into the biggest mistake of his life. Want to know what happens when they finally meet? When all the secrets come spilling out under the stars at Millennium Park. Stay with me, because this is where everything changes. This is where the real story begins.